Your dreams are worthless. That's what my mother said, in front of everyone. Glasses of champagne froze halfway to lips, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and for a second even the Napa Valley breeze seemed to pause in disbelief. Her voice had a sweetness to it, like honey that had spoiled, and it carved straight through my chest. If you've ever been humiliated by your own mother, in front of every powerful person you've ever known, you'll understand what I mean when I say, that moment rewired something inside me. Stay with me. I promise this story goes somewhere you won't expect. It's a story about family and betrayal, about loss and wine and legacy. It starts in California but doesn't end there. So pour a glass, take a breath. This might hurt a little. My name's Ava Carter. I'm 28 years old. I design clothes for a living now. Real ones, not the kind you sketch in high school geometry class while pretending to listen. I was born and raised right here in Napa Valley, on a vineyard that smelled of crushed grapes and old money. The kind of place where everyone knows your name and your family's expectations. But I wasn't always Ava Carter designer. I used to be Margaret Carter's daughter. That version of me died the night of the party. It was a warm June evening in 2025, the kind where the sun stretches out long, like it's reluctant to leave the vines. Lanterns hung from trees, flickering above the rows of Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon, casting golden shadows over the estate lawn. Guests in designer linen laughed gently over their glasses, swirling decades of our family's reputation in their hands. I stood near the back of the garden, clutching my sketchbook like a shield. The dress I wore wasn't from any boutique. I'd made it myself. Soft lilac with hand-stitched embroidery, something hopeful and delicate. But next to the couture gowns and luxury brands, I might as well have shown up in a paper bag. Still, I smiled. I told myself, just make it through tonight. Then came the toast. Margaret tapped her spoon against her glass. Everyone, she said, smiling her politician smile, let's raise a glass to Ethan. My son, my heir, and the reason this winery continues to thrive. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Ethan raised his glass and gave a humble nod that made me want to throw up. And my daughter? Margaret continued. My stomach dropped. Little Ava, still chasing her. Dreams of fashion, bless her heart. But you know what they say? Not every flower blooms. There was a pause, a short, painful beat, and then polite laughter. Someone near me even murmured, "Poor thing." I don't know who it was. Doesn't matter, it could have been any of them. I felt my face flush. My fingers dug into the corners of my sketchbook, creasing the pages I'd worked on for months. I kept my chin up, but inside something cracked. Ethan chimed in, because of course he did. "Maybe she'll design the new staff uniforms," he grinned, looking straight at me. "Aprons and wine stains. Very on brand." Laughter again, louder this time. My vision blurred for a second. I blinked quickly. I refused to cry here, not in front of them, not in front of her. My legs itched to run, but I stayed rooted. Just like the vineyard, right? Always planted. Always stuck. I whispered something. I don't even remember what. I think it was, "Excuse me." But no one heard me. Or maybe they just didn't care. I walked away slowly, the sound of my heels muffled by the gravel path. The fairy lights above twinkled like they were mocking me. Somewhere behind me, Margaret's laugh rang out again. Smooth, sharp, unapologetic. I passed the fountain where I used to play as a child, where my grandfather used to lift me and say, "You've got the heart of an artist, Ava, not like the rest of us. You'll make something new." Funny how the same water still trickled down its stone tears, even though everything else had changed. I ended up by the old stone wall at the edge of the property, just beyond the last row of vines. There, hidden from the party, I finally let my shoulders fall. My hands trembled. Not from sadness, from rage. All my life I'd been told to help out, stay quiet, be grateful. I poured wine at tastings. I packed shipments during harvest season. I even gave up scholarships to stay home when Dad died because the family needed me. But tonight I realized something terrifying and true. They never saw me as part of this family, just a helper, a filler in family photos, a girl with silly dreams. I turned the sketchbook over in my hands. One of the pages had smeared. A dark line streaked through the center of a gown I'd designed weeks ago. My fingers brushed the charcoal gently, like touching a wound that hadn't scabbed over yet. I wanted to scream, or break something, or run. Instead, I stared out at the horizon, at the hills soaked in twilight, and whispered just 4 words to myself. I'm done with this. I didn't know where I was going next, but I knew one thing. It wouldn't be here. Not under Margaret's thumb. Not next to Ethan's smirk. My dreams weren't worthless, not to me. And someday, they'd see. I didn't know then that the path would lead to Los Angeles, or that I'd sleep in a stranger's living room for 2 weeks, or that I'd meet a girl named Jade who'd change everything. All I knew was that something inside me had finally woken up, and it was hungry. 3 days after the party, the vineyard felt quieter, or maybe I'd just stopped pretending it was home. The morning fog hadn't lifted yet. It draped over the vines like a thick gray veil, muting everything, the chirps of birds, the rustle of leaves, even the usual chatter of the staff. I moved like a ghost through the gravel paths, my boots crunching against the stones, sketchbook pressed tightly against my chest, though I hadn't opened it since the night of the toast. I ended up at Granddad's office. The door creaked the same way it always had, its hinges stiff from disuse. No one had been in there since he passed. Margaret said it was being preserved, but I knew what that meant. Ignored. Forgotten. Just like him, just like me. The air inside smelled like cedarwood and ink and a hint of tobacco. I breathed it in slowly, letting the scent settle into my lungs. The dust was thick. It curled in the sunlight like smoke, but I didn't care. I traced my fingers along the edge of his desk. The wood was scratched, warm, real, like him. And then I saw it. The bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked. He used to chuckle and say, "Every artist needs a drawer for secrets." When I was little, I'd imagine it was full of treasure maps or letters from old loves. But now, standing there in the silence, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was inside. Still, my hand moved on its own. I grabbed the heavy brass letter opener from his paper tray, the one shaped like a feather, and wedged it into the seam. A sharp twist, a snap. The drawer gave. At first, just papers, yellowed receipts, a faded photo of him and me, both in overalls, grape juice on our hands. I paused for a second, fingers hovering over the image before gently setting it aside. Then I saw the envelope. It was marked Revised Will 2023 in his unmistakable looping script. My heart started hammering. I slid it open, and that's when the world shifted. The original will, the one I'd seen years ago, had both Ethan and me listed as joint heirs. I remembered how Granddad looked me in the eyes and said, "Half of this is yours, Ava. Not because you asked for it, but because you've earned it. Your creativity, it belongs here." But this version, this one had my name crossed out, replaced. There was only one heir now, Ethan Carter. At the bottom was a signature that made my blood run cold. Margaret Carter. It was her handwriting. I knew every loop and slant. She'd written enough red pen notes on my school permission slips to last a lifetime. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My fingers trembled as I clutched the page, the edges digging into my skin. My mouth went dry. "She forged it," I whispered. She actually did it." And suddenly, every memory began to rearrange itself. All those cold stares, the way she dismissed my designs, how she always kept me busy with small tasks while Ethan toured the estate with buyers, the party toast. It wasn't random. It was a plan. She never intended for me to inherit anything. I wasn't the daughter she wanted. I was an obstacle, a risk. And this was her insurance policy. I sank down onto the leather armchair, the will still in my hands. My knees gave out like someone had pulled a string. The leather squeaked beneath me, the only sound in the room. Images of my grandfather came rushing back, sitting across this very desk, sipping black coffee, sketching maps of the vineyard with me in purple crayon. He'd promised me. He believed in me. And now, this betrayal was defiling his memory too. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't wipe them away. I just let them fall, one by one, until one splashed onto the page, smearing the ink slightly over Ethan's name. I wanted to scream, confront her, burn the whole thing to the ground, but instead, I just stared. Because more than anything, I felt something scarier than anger. I felt numb, like I'd already been erased. My mind played tricks on me. I heard Granddad's voice again, that deep, warm chuckle. The fire in you, Ava, it'll either build something beautiful or burn everything down. Up to you. I looked at the will again, and in that moment, something clicked. I stood, not in rage, in resolve. I folded the document slowly, carefully, and slipped it into the sketchbook I hadn't touched in days. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I wasn't leaving it behind. This wasn't just ink on paper. This was truth, and it would come back when they least expected it. As I stepped out of the office, the fog had finally begun to lift. Sunlight peeked through the clouds, dappling the vineyards with gold, but the chill didn't leave me. That night I stayed in my room, the small one at the back of the house, the one Margaret never bothered redecorating after I turned 18. I stared at the ceiling fan, its slow rotations humming above me, and I felt like a thread pulled too tight, 1 second from snapping. They think I'll stay. They think I'll swallow this like I've swallowed everything else. But I'm done being their quiet little problem. I closed my eyes. I saw sketches, dresses stitched with rage, sewn with betrayal, lined in defiance. I saw color where they saw gray. I saw a different life, and for the first time in days, I smiled. Not because anything was okay, but because I knew what came next. I'd let them believe they'd won. And then, I'd disappear. I'd vanish so hard it would echo, and someday they'd look up and realize I'd built a world without them. That's when it would hurt. That's when it would finally matter. But first, I had to walk through the fire. I didn't know it yet, but just 2 nights later at the family dinner, the final blow would land. And when it did, it would shatter everything left standing between me and freedom. The night of the family dinner felt like a funeral dressed in crystal and gold. The dining room glittered. That's the only word for it. The chandelier, a grotesque dripping thing from some Italian auction Margaret bragged about endlessly, threw light across the polished oak table, catching on the silverware, the rim of the wine glasses, even the butter knife beside my plate that I hadn't touched. 12 place settings, 11 voices. I didn't count as one anymore. The hum of conversation buzzed above the gentle classical music Margaret insisted on playing at every formal dinner. My hands stayed folded on my lap, cold against the stiff linen napkin. I kept my eyes on my plate, beef tenderloin, saffron risotto, microgreens curled like nervous fingers, a meal fit for a celebration, or a bloodletting. I could feel her watching me. Margaret sat at the head of the table, posture flawless, her fingers resting lightly on the rim of her wine glass. Her voice was velvet and vinegar. "I suppose now's as good a time as any," she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin like she was delivering weather updates. The room hushed. Even Ethan straightened in his seat. She raised her glass. "To Ethan," she said, eyes shining. "The sole heir to Carter Estate Vineyards, our future, our pride." A round of applause erupted, polite but firm. Even Uncle Dan clapped, though he looked like he was choking on his Pinot. Everyone smiled, everyone except me. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my heart. Sole heir. The words echoed like gunshots inside my chest. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped against the tile, sharp and deliberate. Every face turned toward me. I stood. "I'm sorry," I said, though I didn't mean it. My voice shook, but I kept it steady. "What about my share?" Margaret didn't flinch. Her smile stayed plastered in place like porcelain, cracks forming beneath the glaze. She tilted her head slightly like a schoolteacher correcting a misbehaving student. "You're not entitled to anything," she said. "This business isn't a charity, Ava. It's a legacy." A quiet gasp somewhere down the table. Aunt Lily's fork paused mid-cut. Ethan let out a quiet snort. "Maybe design a wine label or two," he said under his breath. "That's more your speed." I stared at him, and then I laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't bitter, just hollow. I turned back to Margaret. "I found the will," I said quietly. For the first time, she blinked. Just once, but it was enough. "You mean the real one," I added, watching her mask slip. Her eyes hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know your handwriting. You forged it." Margaret stood abruptly. The sound of her chair scraping back was sharper than mine. "This is my house," she said, voice clipped. "You're not welcome here if you're going to sling around baseless accusations." I looked around the table. No one moved. No one met my gaze. Not Uncle Dan, not Aunt Lily, not even Ethan. Their silence was a choice, and that silence was the loudest betrayal of all. My fingers clenched the edge of the tablecloth, not in anger, in finality. I nodded once, slow. Then I pulled my napkin from my lap, folded it neatly, and placed it on the plate. My voice was calm when I said, "Then I'm done being part of this family." Margaret scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. You forged a will to erase me. You erased yourself," she snapped, "with your childish fantasies and your little sketchbook. You've never done anything for this family except cost us time and embarrassment." I stepped back. The floor felt solid beneath me for the first time in weeks. "You know what?" I said. "You're right. I'm not part of this family." I grabbed my bag, already packed and waiting near the hallway, and turned for the door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called out. The front door creaked open, letting in a gust of cool night air that smelled of grapevines and earth and endings. I stepped outside. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, and I didn't look back. My car, a beat-up sedan with a cracked rearview mirror and a heart-shaped air freshener swinging from the dash, waited like a lifeboat. I threw my bag in the back seat, slammed the door shut, and sat behind the wheel, staring at the house I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to. I thought I'd cry. I didn't. I just exhaled and turned the key. As the engine rumbled to life, the headlights spilled across the long drive, illuminating the vines, the stone path, the front porch where Margaret stood like a statue. I didn't wave. She didn't move. I drove away. With every mile, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, just a shadow in the distance, just another part of the past. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as the road twisted toward the highway. The stars blurred overhead. A faint song played from the radio. I didn't recognize it, but it didn't matter. It was mine now. I didn't know where I was going yet. I just knew I had to leave before the poison sunk in too deep. I thought of the forged will burning a hole in my sketchbook. I thought of Granddad's voice, the fire in you. I thought of the dress I'd stitched last fall, the one Margaret said looked like a curtain, and how I still had the fabric in my closet. I was done being erased. Let them keep their vineyard, their dinner parties, their lies. I had something they couldn't forge, vision. I had nothing but a duffel bag, a dream, and a silence that no longer scared me. But soon that would be enough, because the next morning I would step onto a cracked sidewalk in Koreatown, Los Angeles, with nothing to lose and everything to build. Los Angeles didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like free fall. The heat hit first. Not the dry kind from Napa, but something sticky and loud. The air here buzzed. Not with bugs, but with motion. Sirens, street vendors, neon signs that blinked without rhythm. Even at 6 a.m., the city moved like it had somewhere to be, and I was already late. My car coughed twice before I parked it outside a faded building in Koreatown. Pink stucco, cracked window on the third floor, metal bars over the front door. A hand-painted sign in the corner store read, "We cash checks, cold soda." This was where my life began again. I dragged my duffel bag up the narrow stairs. No elevator. Paint peeled in strips from the walls like skin after a sunburn. The apartment belonged to a friend, Sandra, who was out of town for the summer. All I had was her Wi-Fi password, her air mattress, and a warning text, "Toilet clogs easy. Be gentle." I sat on the floor that first morning and stared at the gray walls. My sketchbook was beside me. I hadn't opened it since Napa. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at my hands. They looked smaller here, or maybe just more uncertain. My first week passed in a blur of job applications and rejection emails. I walked everywhere, to coffee shops, thrift stores, boutique offices. One manager laughed when he saw fashion assistant on my resume. "You mean like folding clothes?" He smirked. "We need someone who'll mop the floor when customers puke." I took the job. It was a thrift store tucked between a Korean BBQ place and a tarot reader. I worked behind the counter, sorted piles of donated jeans that smelled like cinnamon and mold. $8 ramen in the back on my lunch breaks. I didn't say much, didn't need to. No one here cared who you were before. Sometimes that was a gift. Sometimes it felt like drowning. But every night I came back to that air mattress and unzipped the sketchbook. Just to look. Just to remember I was still in there somewhere. It was on the 12th night when something shifted. Her name was Jade. She worked the evening shift with me. Pink buzz cut, vintage combat boots, eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. She noticed my sketchbook one slow Wednesday when I was tracing over an old design during a lull. "Yo," she said, squinting. "You draw those?" I nodded, defensive, sliding it shut. "They're badass," she said. "That coat? Looks like something Zendaya would wear to war." I laughed, the sound catching me off guard. "You serious?" I asked. Jade shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal, but her eyes were warm. "Dead serious. You ever think about, actually doing something with this stuff?" I looked at her, unsure how to answer. All I could manage was, "I don't even know where to start." She tilted her head. "Start with not hiding it." After that, she started bringing me scraps. A broken zipper from a donated jacket, beads from a ripped prom dress. One day she handed me a giant garbage bag full of old clothes and said, "Play." So I did. I used Sandra's rickety dining table as a workspace. No sewing machine, just a needle, thread, and desperation. I cut, recut, glued when I had to. I bled onto fabric more than once. But when I stepped back after 3 nights, eyes burning, fingers raw, I saw it. A jacket. Military structure, but soft at the edges. Reclaimed denim mixed with leather trim. My dream made real, born from a bag of forgotten clothes. Jade whistled when she saw it. "You made that?" I nodded, heart pounding. "Girl," she said, "we're going to the art fair this weekend." "What?" "There's a booth," she said, "pop-up, cheap, local, nothing big. But trust me, people notice stuff there. You in?" I looked at the jacket again. I was terrified, but I was in. That weekend, Koreatown pulsed with color. Tents lined the sidewalks, hand-painted signs, street musicians. The air smelled like kimchi and fresh cotton candy. I stood behind a folding table with nothing but my jacket on a hanger and a sketchbook open beside it. People walked by. Some stared, some didn't. Then came Mr. Larson, gray beard, sharp blazer, paper coffee cup in hand. He stopped in front of my table, arms crossed. "Yours?" he asked, nodding at the jacket. I nodded, suddenly aware of every imperfection. The crooked hem, the uneven stitch on the collar. He picked it up, turned it over, said nothing for a long while. Finally, "Rough work." My stomach dropped. "But," he added, setting it down carefully, "there's vision here, guts." He tapped the sketchbook. "How many of these have you made?" "Just this one," I said. "I can't afford—" He cut me off. "Put together a collection, 5 looks. Show me something cohesive. I'll give you $5,000. Enough for a workspace, a machine, maybe even a runway someday." I blinked. "You'd invest in me?" He smiled. It was small, almost reluctant. "I invest in risk. You're bleeding it." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Later that night, back on the air mattress, I stared at the ceiling and laughed. Not from joy, not yet. From shock, from the dizzy realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. That maybe all those nights crying into my pillow in Napa weren't wasted. Maybe I was finally starting. I still didn't know what success looked like. I didn't know if $5,000 would stretch far enough. I didn't even know how to properly sew a zipper yet. But I had sketches. I had a plan. And now, I had Jade. I sat up, reached for the sketchbook, and wrote something on the last page in bold, shaky pen. This is not revenge. This is rebirth. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of Margaret's face when I closed the book, because in the back of my mind I knew someday she'd see this jacket and realize she bet on the wrong child. 2 weeks after the art fair, I still wasn't sleeping much. The nights blurred together, needles poking fingertips, coffee stains on my sketchbook, scraps of fabric trailing across Sandra's living room like footprints of a ghost chasing something it hadn't caught yet. The $5,000 offer from Mr. Larson played on repeat in my head. I hadn't touched the money. Not yet. I didn't want to waste a cent until I knew I was ready, whatever ready meant. And then Jade showed up at the thrift store on a Friday afternoon with 2 iced coffees and that look in her eye, the one that meant she was up to something. "Saturday," she said, sliding the drink into my hand. "You and me, Boyle Heights Art Fair." I blinked. "Again? This one's bigger, more legit, and Mr. Coffeebeard's gonna be there." "Larson?" She nodded, grinning. "He sponsors a few booths. He told me last time he shows up around noon." I hesitated. I had no table, no booth, no collection. "You said 5 looks," she reminded me. "We've got one. Let's make 4 more." I stared at her like she'd lost it. Then I laughed. And that night, we didn't sleep. We turned Sandra's kitchen into a workshop, hung bedsheets over the windows to block the glare. The floor disappeared under thread, pins, fabric scraps. I sliced patterns on the counter, Jade stitched with her tongue poking out like she was solving a puzzle. We burned ourselves with hot glue, swore like sailors, laughed like kids. We ate cold dumplings out of a plastic bag and danced to Prince at 3 a.m. when we finished look number 3. The 5th piece, a structured dress made from patchwork velvet and pleated cotton, nearly broke me. The hem refused to stay straight. I wanted to scream, rip the whole thing in 2, give up. But then Jade placed a hand on my shoulder. "No one's gonna see the hem," she whispered. "They'll be too busy looking at what you built." We rolled into the fair just after sunrise, eyes red, arms full, no booth, no reservation, but Jade knew a vendor who let us hang our collection from the fence behind his candle stand. It was chaos. Kids running under tables, music clashing from 3 directions, people brushing past without a glance. I kept adjusting the display, smoothing fabric, checking seams. And then he arrived. Mr. Larson. Same blazer, same paper coffee cup, same unreadable expression. He stopped in front of the first look, the jacket from Koreatown. Then walked slowly down the row, the asymmetrical skirt in layered linen, the sheer blouse with steel snaps, the velvet dress. He said nothing for a full minute. Then he looked at me. "Better," he said. My throat went dry. "Better?" "Still raw," he added, thumbing a stitch near the sleeve. "But there's rhythm here now. Intent." He held up a finger. "You need workspace, real tools, someone to critique your blind spots." I nodded, silent, afraid to breathe. He pulled a card from his coat pocket. "I know a guy with a cheap studio space in downtown. It's ugly, but it works. Tell him I sent you." Then, and I swear I nearly fainted, he smiled. Not wide, not warm, but real. "And Ava?" he added, already turning to leave. I froze. "How do you know my name?" He pointed at the sketchbook on the table. "You signed every page. That's something most people are too scared to do." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Jade grabbed me and shook my shoulders. "Did you hear that? You've got rhythm. Girl, we're in business." I stood there, arms limp at my sides, watching the sunlight hit the velvet just right, like it was breathing. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Not yet. We left the fair with wind-burned cheeks, sore feet, and hope stitched into every pocket. The next day, I went to the address on Larson's card. The building was squat and stained, nestled between a closed-down print shop and a bail bonds office. A faded sign on the door read, "Textiles, Art, Storage, ring bell twice." I did. An old man named Marco answered, eyebrows bushy, grease on his hands. "Larson's girl?" "Yeah," I said, hugging my sketchbook to my chest. He nodded once. "3rd floor. It's hot in the summer. No elevator. You want it or not?" I looked past him, at the cracked tile floors, the humming fluorescent lights, the ancient stairwell. Then I looked at my own reflection in the front glass. The same girl who stood at the vineyard, humiliated. The same girl who walked away from a dinner table filled with people who never saw her. "No," I said, "I don't want it." Marco raised a bushy eyebrow. "I need it." He smiled without showing teeth. "Good answer." The studio was barely 200 square feet. 1 window, a chipped table, a stool missing a leg. But to me, it was a cathedral. I pinned my sketches to the wall, set up a lamp, unpacked the bundle of secondhand fabric Jade helped me haul in. And then I sewed for 12 hours straight. The city roared outside, but inside the only sounds were the hum of the needle and the quiet rhythm of belief beginning to rebuild itself. Late that night, I stepped outside into the alley. The moon hung low. Someone nearby played jazz on a rusty trumpet. The air smelled like gasoline and garlic. I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to choose me. I was already building something they couldn't deny. They'd told me I'd fail. But now, I had a studio, a mentor, a friend who believed in me, and if Larson was right, I also had rhythm. All I needed next was proof. Something that screamed, I'm here, I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere. I didn't know it yet, but that proof was coming, in the form of a ripped hem, a last-minute miracle, and a boutique owner who'd change everything. The first few days in the studio felt like standing at the edge of something massive. Not a cliff exactly, more like the first blank page of a book I was terrified to start writing. The walls were bare except for the sketches I'd pinned up, curled slightly at the edges. The sunlight came through the single dusty window at a slant, making strange shapes on the floor like broken stained glass. Everything smelled like rust, glue, and old fabric, but to me it smelled like freedom. I worked until my back screamed. No AC, no ergonomic chair, just a cracked wooden stool and a secondhand sewing machine that rattled like a lawnmower. I stitched until my fingers went numb, broke 2 needles by accident, and cried once. Not because anything went wrong, but because for the first time in my life, every ounce of effort felt like it was building towards something instead of away from it. Jade came by almost every day after work. She'd sit on a stack of unused fabric rolls and read out loud from fashion blogs or scroll TikTok for ideas. You've got the bones, she said one night, chewing on a Twizzler. You just need sharper edges. So I pushed harder. I experimented with mixed textures. Denim sleeves sewn into chiffon bodices, embroidery layered over mesh. Some of it was bad, like deeply embarrassing. But I kept going. I wasn't aiming for perfection anymore. I was aiming for honesty. By week 2, I had 6 pieces hanging on the rack, all in varying states of completion. I'd started naming them like characters: Velvet Warrior, Rain Girl, the one who left. Every thread held a little piece of my story. Then came the ripped dress. It was a Thursday. I'd spent all morning working on a midnight blue wrap dress. Sleek, clean lines, subtle detailing at the collar. I was threading the final hem when the machine jammed, a horrible snap. Then silence. I pulled the fabric free, heart sinking. The entire bottom seam had torn, splitting the dress down the middle like a wound. I stared at it, mouth slightly open, eyes burning. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I tried to restitch, but nothing lined up. The tension was off. It buckled and puckered and bunched. The more I tried to fix it, the worse it looked. Finally, I threw it across the room and sank to the floor, my back against the cold concrete wall. I sat there for a long time. The buzzing energy that had carried me this far drained from my limbs, leaving behind a numb, heavy weight. My thoughts went dark. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it's not supposed to happen for people like me. Maybe I'm not special, just stubborn. Jade found me there an hour later. She crouched down, didn't say a word, and picked up the dress. She held it up, studied it for a moment, then looked at me. "What if this isn't ruined?" she asked. I scoffed, dragging my sleeve across my cheek. "I'm serious," she said. "What if it's a feature?" I blinked. "What?" "The tear. It's raw, honest. You said you wanted these to tell your story, right? Well, what's more real than a clean line breaking open?" Her words hung in the air. I stood slowly, walked over, took the dress from her hands. The rip was diagonal, imperfect, dramatic. I ran my fingers along the edge, and suddenly, I saw it. Not a flaw, a statement. That night, I reworked the entire dress, left the seam open, finished the edges with bold red thread, and added a metal clasp at the hip that looked like armor. When I stepped back, I didn't see failure. I saw defiance. The next day, the boutique owner walked in. It was pure accident. A friend of Marco's, tall, silver-haired, wearing oversized sunglasses and a blazer with sequined lapels. She was dropping something off next door and wandered into the studio after seeing the display rack through the window. Her eyes scanned the room. She didn't say a word at first, just walked up to the rack and ran her fingers along the hem of Velvet Warrior. Then she paused at the ripped dress. "This," she said, voice rich and low, "this is Haunting. I held my breath. You made all of these? She asked. I nodded. Every stitch. She turned to face me. I'm Tasha. I own a small boutique over on Melrose. We do one-of-a-kind pieces, limited runs, stuff with bite. She tapped the dress. This has teeth. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. Tasha pulled out her phone. Can you deliver 5 pieces by next Friday? I finally found my voice. You want to buy them? She grinned. I want to sell them. You get a cut. And if they move fast, we talk long term. I stared at her. Jade, who had just walked in with a bag of tacos, dropped it on the floor. Tasha held out her hand. I shook it, heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. She looked me in the eye. Welcome to the game. When she left, the silence returned, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt full. I turned to Jade, still frozen in the doorway. She screamed. I laughed. We danced in circles around the studio, hugging and crying and half choking on taco steam. I took the ripped dress off the rack, held it in front of me like it was sacred. Because it was. The beginning of something real. I didn't sleep that night. I sketched until dawn, designs pouring out like floodwater. By sunrise, I had a plan, a delivery deadline, and a new understanding of what I was capable of. The girl from Napa, the one they mocked at the vineyard, the one Margaret erased from the will, she was still here, and she was just getting started. Next stop, a pop-up event that would change everything. The night before the pop-up, I barely slept. Not from nerves, not exactly. More like anticipation had wrapped itself around my spine and refused to let go. I lay on the studio floor, arms tucked beneath my head, staring at the ceiling with eyes that wouldn't blink. I kept replaying the last words Tasha had said after collecting the finished pieces. Trust your instincts, they're louder than fear. The 5 designs were gone now, boxed up, tagged, and transported to her boutique. Velvet Warrior, the one who left. Second Skin, each one had a piece of my past stitched into it. I'd sewn through grief, I'd stitched through betrayal, and now my pain hung on a rack in one of the most curated fashion spaces on Melrose. By sunrise, Jade showed up with coffee and lipstick on her teeth. You ready to be famous? She grinned. God, no. We burst into laughter, shaky and breathless. We took the bus across town. The morning light cast a warm glow across downtown LA, smearing everything with that golden haze you only get after sleepless nights and stubborn hope. The city hummed, and for once, I felt like I was humming with it. The event was already alive when we arrived. The pop-up was part of a weekend collective at an industrial space just off Fairfax. Exposed beams, polished concrete floors, racks of independent designers lined against gallery white walls. Music pulsed low from hidden speakers. Models swayed backstage. Makeup artists whispered while dabbing shimmer under sharp cheekbones. My rack stood near the far wall. 5 looks, clean and defiant. People drifted past, pausing longer than I expected. Some leaned in close. A few took photos. Then I spotted him. He wasn't flashy, no clipboard or entourage, just a simple linen shirt, dark jeans, and eyes that scanned like searchlights. Jade nudged me. That's him. Who? Micah Reyes, she whispered. Critic, LA style. He hates everything. My stomach dropped. He stopped in front of the one who left, tilted his head, fingers grazing the seam just barely. He moved on, but slowly, methodically. He circled back to Second Skin, touching the raw-edge neckline like he was deciphering it. Then he scribbled something in a small black notebook and disappeared. I didn't breathe again for 2 full minutes. By noon, people were gathering. Tasha stood beside me in heels I couldn't dream of walking in, talking to a boutique rep from Venice. Every few minutes, someone pointed at one of my pieces. Then came the sound I'll never forget. A cash register dinged. It wasn't much, a single sale. A client bought Rain Girl, the flowy organza piece I'd almost thrown away, but the sound echoed in my chest like thunder. An hour later, Velvet Warrior was gone. Then Second Skin. Then the one who left. By 3 o'clock, the rack was empty. Every single piece sold. I stood there dumbfounded, arms crossed over my chest, heart racing like I'd just jumped off a cliff and landed on my feet. Jade was crying. Tasha leaned over and whispered, "Told you this city likes teeth." But I couldn't speak. Not until a woman approached me, early 30s, short curls, confidence in every step. She held her phone out. "You're Ava, right? The designer?" I nodded. She turned the screen toward me. "Just wanted to show you something." It was a tweet. Micah Reyes, verified. Unexpected brilliance at today's Fairfax pop-up. Ava Carter's raw edge work punches right through the noise. Honest, unflinching. Keep an eye on her. My vision blurred. I don't even remember what I said to the woman. I think I thanked her. I think I smiled. But inside I cracked wide open. Not in pain, in release. The girl from the vineyard, the one with the sketchbook and shaky hands, the one who stood humiliated while her family laughed, she had survived. And more than that, she'd won. When the crowd finally thinned and the sun began slipping down behind the LA skyline, painting the windows orange and gold, I stepped outside with Jade. The air was warm. Someone nearby played a saxophone, the notes drifting down the alley like secrets. I leaned against the brick wall, still clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. "I don't know what to do with this," I whispered. Jade smiled, lighting a cigarette. "You do. You've always known. You just forgot for a while." I turned toward her. "What now?" "Now," she said, blowing smoke toward the clouds, "we build a damn empire." That night we went back to the studio. It was still small, still hot, still lit by a single desk lamp and strung up fairy lights, but something was different. I walked over to the empty rack, ran my fingers across the metal bar. Then I took the photo of Margaret and Ethan, the one I'd kept hidden in the back of a drawer, and pinned it beside Micah's tweet. Not as fuel, as a reminder. Not everyone will believe in you, but you don't need everyone. You just need yourself. And one open door. And maybe, just maybe, I was standing in the hallway now, reaching for the next one. I glanced at the wall where all my sketches hung, rows and rows of dreams that had once felt impossible, and I whispered, "We're just getting started." What I didn't know? That across town, a glossy magazine editor had just picked up Micah's tweet and was about to make a call that would change everything. 2 years. That's how long it had been since the vineyard. 2 years since I slammed the front door behind me, drove into the night with nothing but a sketchbook and a promise to myself. Now I stood under the white-hot glare of a photography studio in downtown LA, watching a model slip into one of my gowns. Midnight silk, slit down the leg, structured shoulder like a blade. A fan blew behind her, making the fabric ripple like it was breathing. "You nailed it," the photographer muttered, crouching for the shot. "This one's going to eat the cover alive." The words barely registered, not because I didn't believe them, but because they didn't feel real yet, not even when I glanced down at the tablet in my hand and saw my name in bold font on the layout mock-up, Ava Carter, the voice behind the thread. Not even when the stylist clapped and called my designs iconic. It still felt like I was borrowing the life of someone braver, but then again, maybe I had become her. My brand, Carterline, now had its own corner in 2 LA boutiques and a capsule line launching with a major online retailer. We had press features, an intern, a mood board for Paris Fashion Week pinned in the office hallway, and a studio, a real one, not just rented space with cracked floors and flickering lights. This one had tall windows, plants that didn't die. Framed pieces from my first collection hung like war medals across the far wall. We even had a neon sign that glowed soft pink in the back. She stitched her own salvation. Sometimes I stood beneath that sign late at night when everyone else had gone home, my palms pressed to the cutting table, and just listened. To the hum of the machines, to the soft tick of the wall clock, to the silence that used to terrify me, now filled with something steadier, something earned. Jade was still with me. She ran the operations now, her laptop practically glued to her hip. "You're the dreamer? I'm the engine," she liked to say, chomping on a granola bar and shoving spreadsheets under my nose. And Larson? He visited once a month, never stayed long. Always wore the same coat and drank the same bitter coffee, but he watched carefully. And every time he left, he'd pat my shoulder once and say, "Still sharp, don't dull." It meant more than he'd ever know. The day the magazine came out, I didn't tell anyone. I went to a newsstand in Silver Lake, picked up a copy, and walked 3 blocks to a bench across from a mural I used to stare at when I was broke and searching Craigslist for studio space. I opened the page slowly. There it was. my dress on the front cover, my face, shadowed but strong, in the corner inset. And beside it, in crisp serif font, the Napa-born visionary who turned exile into elegance. Napa. There it was. The word hit me like perfume from a stranger, familiar, disorienting. For the first time in 2 years, I let myself wonder. Have they seen it? Margaret, Ethan, their wine-soaked empire, their polished social dinners. Did a copy of this magazine sit on a glass coffee table in their tasting room? Did Margaret's perfectly manicured fingers freeze mid-page? Part of me didn't care, but part of me burned for it. That night, back in the studio, I pulled up an old photo on my phone, the vineyard, drenched in golden light. Me, 17, standing at the edge of the vines with my sketchbook. Margaret had taken the photo, or maybe Ethan had. I stared at it a long time. Then Jade burst in, waving her phone. Guess who called? I blinked. Who? New York Fashion Week. I laughed. Shut up. They want you. 1 slot, emerging designer showcase. It's real, Ava. My legs went weak. I sank into the chair, hand over my mouth. I'm not ready, I whispered. You are, Jade said. You've been ready since the first ripped dress. The image of that torn hem flashed in my mind. How far we'd come since then, from threadbare scraps to runway slots. I stood slowly. Call them back, I said. Tell them I'm in. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that all day. I turned toward the corkboard wall, where we kept clippings, show ideas, client notes. In the corner, behind a layer of pinned fabric swatches, I saw it. A photo of the vineyard, half covered. Without thinking, I pulled it free, held it in my hand, turned it over, and then did something I hadn't planned. I walked into the office, pulled out thick ivory cardstock, and started writing. An invitation to my show. Addressed to the Carter family, Carter Estate Winery, Napa Valley. CA. I sealed it. No return address. Just my initials on the flap. AC. Jade leaned against the doorframe. You sure about this? I'm not doing it for them, I said. Then who? I looked out the window. For me. We sent it first thing in the morning. Overnight. I imagined the envelope landing on their doorstep like a ghost. Margaret opening it with that clipped smile. Ethan pretending not to care, even as his jaw twitched. I didn't want revenge. Not exactly. But I wanted them to know. To see what grew in the ashes they left behind. A week later, the RSVP envelope arrived. Unopened, plain, no note. But the box was checked. Attending. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tucked it into my sketchbook and whispered, Game on. What I didn't know? They weren't just coming. They were coming with a plan of their own. The envelope sat on the edge of the Carter family's dining table like it didn't belong. It was heavy, cream cardstock, gold trim, sealed with deep red wax pressed into the initials AC, the kind of envelope that didn't whisper, it declared, the kind that arrived by courier, not mail, hand-delivered like a challenge. Margaret Carter sliced it open with her letter opener, the same one Granddad used to keep in his vineyard office, the same one I'd used to pry open the drawer and find the truth 2 years ago. Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes lingered too long on the invitation as she read it. New York Fashion Week, February Showcase, Emerging Designer Spotlight. Presented by Ava Carter. The name sat in bold serif font in the center of the page like a nameplate on a door she was never meant to knock on. Margaret scoffed, folding the paper carefully and placing it back inside the envelope. She thinks she's something now, she said. Ethan, lounging at the end of the table with a glass of Malbec, gave a low chuckle. Well, she's not pouring wine anymore. Margaret looked up sharply. She's trying to bait us. Ethan shrugged. Then don't go. But he didn't mean it. His fingers were already scrolling on his phone, searching for articles, social tags. Ava Carter, Carterlin, critic mentions, fashion reels. And when he saw the photo, the one from the LA pop-up with Micah Reyes's quote underneath, something flickered behind his smirk. Jealousy? Shame? Recognition? He shut the screen quickly. Margaret stood and crossed to the bar cart. She poured herself a double. Not the wine, but the whiskey, neat. She wants us there, she said, to watch her parade around in fabric and glitter. She wants revenge, Ethan muttered. Margaret swirled the glass in her hand, then looked toward the vineyard window, her gaze landing somewhere far off. No, she said, almost to herself. She wants proof. A pause. Then she turned. We're going. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Seriously? She invited us. Her tone shifted, colder, calculating. So let's accept. But why? So we can clap for her? Margaret's mouth curled. No, so we can remind her exactly who she came from. Back in LA, I stared at the RSVP envelope like it might bite. It had arrived 3 days after I sent the invite. No letter, no signature, just a single check mark beside attending. I folded the response and tucked it into the back of my sketchbook, right behind the original forged will I still kept, wrinkled but never forgotten. They're coming, I told Jade. She looked up from the sewing table, scissors in hand. Your mom and Ethan? I nodded. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I crossed the studio, ran my hand across the dress form that wore my finale piece, a floor-length midnight black gown with a sculpted shoulder and a cascade of silk that moved like smoke. I don't think I'll know until I see them. Jade came beside me, bumped my shoulder gently. They're walking into your world now. The days leading up to the show passed like a blur. Fittings, interviews, final stitches, emergency alterations. I barely slept. My nerves were raw, but somewhere under the anxiety, something stronger pulsed. Power. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the host, and they were just guests. 3 nights before the show, I found myself standing in front of my old photo board, the one we'd dragged from our Koreatown thrift store days. It was cluttered now with Polaroids, fashion show clippings, handwritten goals. In the bottom corner, nearly buried, was a photo of the vineyard. Golden light, rows of grapes, the old stone wall I used to hide behind as a child. I pulled it free, held it, then pinned it right in the center of the board. Above it, I scribbled in red marker. Prove them wrong by building something they can't ignore. The next morning, I walked into our conference room and printed 10 high-gloss invitations for the press section, each with my name front and center, each one with a gold seal, and one addressed specifically to Margaret Carter, proprietor Carter Estate, Vineyards, Napa Valley, CA. I handed the stack to our publicist. Make sure this one is in the front row. She glanced at the name. Family? I smiled. In a way. On the night of their flight, I imagined them packing. Margaret choosing her jewelry, Ethan making sure his suit fit. I wondered if they thought this would be a victory lap for them, a chance to reattach themselves to my name, to paint themselves as supporters in the crowd. But this wasn't their vineyard. This was my runway, and I had no intention of letting them walk it with me. The morning of the show, snow fluttered over Manhattan in light, delicate sheets. The city felt muffled, like it was holding its breath. So was I. Backstage, models stretched and swayed. Makeup brushes swept across cheekbones. Steam hissed from irons. My collection hung in perfect rows, bold, sculpted, imperfect. Every piece told a story they never asked to hear. Jade adjusted the lighting cues. Larson nodded at me from the edge of the wings, a rare flicker of pride in his eyes. And me? I stood center stage before the show began, closed my eyes and whispered, "This is the part they can't take." The doors opened, seats filled, the lights dimmed, and somewhere in the 3rd row I saw them. Margaret, in a pristine white coat, face unreadable. Ethan beside her, hands in his lap, eyes flicking across the room. They were here. They were watching. And they had no idea what was coming. What none of us knew, what not even I could predict, was what would happen when the lights rose, the music swelled, and my story walked down the runway. The first beat of music dropped like thunder inside the glass-walled venue. It was deep, moody, industrial, more heartbeat than melody, and it rattled through the floor, through the seats, through the spine. The runway glowed with soft amber light, sharp and cinematic, slicing through the darkness like a spotlight on fate itself. I stood in the wings, hidden just beyond the curtain, breath shallow, fingers tight around my headset mic. I couldn't see the audience clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew they were there, the editors, the buyers, the critics, and Margaret. I knew exactly where she sat. 3rd row, center, legs crossed, expression carved in porcelain. She hadn't smiled once. Good. The first model stepped out. She wore The One Who Left, now remastered with sharper lines, deeper contrast, layered organza over deconstructed denim, a sheer red back panel that fluttered like a ghost when she walked. The room hushed. Then camera shutters began to click. 1, 2, then a chorus. Jade beside me whispered, "They're eating it up." But I couldn't speak. My throat felt raw. I watched as the second model emerged. Second skin. Armor-like bodice with exposed seams, stitched by hand in silk and steel threads. Every step was poetry, every turn a declaration. They kept coming. A storm coat sculpted from waxed canvas and velvet. A structured blazer with the hem left intentionally unfinished. A dress sewn from layered black netting. Jagged, angular, unapologetic. Each piece was a scar. Each piece was a resurrection. Then came the final look. The one I designed just 2 weeks ago in the silence of a sleepless night, thinking about Granddad's last words to me. It was a floor-length coat dress in deep wine red. High collar, intricate pleats, a belt embroidered with hand-stitched words in gold thread. I was never yours to erase. The model who wore it had hair slicked back and eyes that didn't flinch. She walked slow, intentional, like she was marching through the fire and daring it to burn her. The audience didn't clap right away. They stared. Some leaned forward. I watched Margaret shift in her seat, lips pressing together, jaw tight. She knew. This wasn't just fashion. This was war, and I had won. The final beat of music faded, then applause. It started with one person, someone near the back, then grew, louder, sharper, a wave. A standing ovation began in the left wing and rippled across the room. I stood frozen. My hands shook. Jade grabbed my shoulders. "Go," she whispered. "Take your bow." I stepped onto the runway, legs numb, heart pounding. The lights hit me instantly. I blinked against their heat. The room blurred for a moment, not from nerves, but because my eyes had filled with tears. But I didn't cry. I smiled, not wide, not polite, just enough. I raised a hand in quiet thanks, turned slowly, then glanced toward the third row. Margaret didn't clap. Ethan did. But his eyes looked confused, as if he hadn't realized until this very moment that I wasn't the failure they left behind. I looked directly at them, just for a second. Then I turned back to the crowd. The applause faded. The lights dimmed. Backstage there was chaos, hugs, high fives, laughter. But I stayed silent. I stepped into the dressing area, closed the door, and sank into the nearest chair. My reflection stared back at me in the makeup mirror. Not Ava the daughter. Not Ava the problem. Ava the artist. Ava the survivor. I peeled off my headset and ran a hand through my hair. My chest felt tight, like something enormous had ended, and something else, something even more dangerous, was just beginning, because I knew what was coming next. They wouldn't leave without speaking to me. I was right. 15 minutes later, Jade stuck her head into the room. Her expression was tight. "They're here." I didn't ask who. I already knew. I stood. Walked slowly into the hallway, heels echoing against polished concrete, one by one, and there they were, Margaret, Ethan, both in the lobby. The soft hum of the after-party buzzed through the glass wall behind them. Margaret still hadn't removed her gloves. She looked at me like I was a stranger. "Ava," she said softly with a small, practiced smile, "you've come a long way." I tilted my head. "Did you enjoy the show?" Margaret hesitated. "It was bold." I gave her a smile, small, tight, mirroring hers. "You always said I lacked structure." Ethan shifted awkwardly beside her. "You're really doing it, huh?" "I've been doing it," I said. The silence between us stretched thin. Then Margaret stepped forward, just slightly. "You know," she said, voice sweet and sharp, "if you'd come to us before all this, we might have helped you." I let out a small laugh. "You did help me. When you erased me, you gave me the space to find who I actually was." Her eyes narrowed. Ethan stepped in. "Look, we came to support you. That counts for something." I turned to him. "You came to see if I failed." They both went silent, and then I said it, the thing I'd been holding on to since the night in the vineyard. "I didn't build all this to prove you wrong," I whispered. "I built it to prove myself right." Margaret's smile slipped, just slightly. She looked around the room, as if hoping someone else had heard me, someone who could soften the blow. But there was no one, just us, and everything unsaid. She took a step back. Well, we should let you get back to your crowd. I nodded. You should. They turned, walked toward the doors. But just before leaving, Margaret paused and looked back over her shoulder. There was something in her eyes, not pride, not remorse, something more dangerous, envy. And I knew this wasn't over. She wouldn't stay silent forever, and she wouldn't leave my name alone now that it carried value. As the doors swung closed behind her, I turned back toward the dressing room, my pulse steady, my fire reignited, because this time I would be ready. What I didn't know was how far she'd go to claw her way back into the legacy she tried to erase me from. The applause was gone. The lights dimmed, the runway cleared, and the venue, once alive with glittering flashes and echoing cheers, settled into a quiet hum of after-show chatter and clinking champagne flutes. Backstage, my team embraced. Models peeled off heels and lashes, and photographers packed their lenses into worn canvas bags. But I stood alone for a moment longer. In the corner near the curtain, I watched the final guests drift toward the exit, a blur of velvet coats, silver hair, and press passes. It wasn't until I caught the faintest scent of Margaret's perfume, that sharp floral sting I used to associate with control, that I knew they hadn't left. They were waiting. The anticipation coiled tight in my stomach, not like fear anymore, but readiness. The same feeling you get before stepping into the ring, not to fight, but to stand, unmoved. Jade popped her head into the hallway and gave a small nod. They're outside. My fingers curled briefly at my sides. They asked to see me? I asked. No, they just stayed. I exhaled, not in anger, in release. Okay, I said. Let's end this. I walked slowly into the lobby, each step deliberate, heels ticking softly against the polished floor. The crowd had thinned, leaving behind shadows and scattered programs. The soft hum of distant traffic filtered through the glass doors. Margaret stood near a column, perfectly composed. Ethan beside her, looser, but strangely quiet. They were dressed like they were attending someone else's victory, stiff, overdressed, and out of place. She turned when she heard me. No smile, no sneer, just silence. Ava, she said. I didn't stop walking until I stood 10 feet from them, close enough to see the tension in her jaw, the faint tremble in Ethan's fingers as he adjusted his cufflink. Congratulations, she said finally. The show was striking. I tilted my head. That's one word for it. A pause. I mean it, she added. You've done well for yourself. Clearly. The way she said yourself felt like a scratch beneath velvet. I nodded once. Thanks. Another silence bloomed, not empty, but loaded. Then Ethan spoke. So, this is it? The whole fashion thing? It's real now? I looked at him. His eyes darted away when they met mine. Has been for a while, I said. You just weren't paying attention. His smirk was weaker than I remembered. Guess we underestimated you. No, I said. You erased me. That's different. Margaret flinched. I suppose, she said slowly, we all made decisions we thought were best at the time. You forged a will, I said. My voice was calm, even. You rewrote a legacy that wasn't yours to control. Her face didn't change, but Ethan looked up sharply, guilt flickering behind his eyes. I'm not here to argue, she said. Good, I replied, because I'm not here to forgive. Jade appeared quietly at the far side of the room, just behind the velvet curtain, watching, but not interfering. Like she always did, witness, not savior. I don't need closure, I added. Not from you. Margaret's hands clasped tightly in front of her, her ring glinted under the lobby light. Then what do you need, Ava? She asked. I looked around, at the space, at the polished concrete floors, at the name Carter line printed across the show program still sitting on the table beside us. Nothing, I said. I saw it then, the crack, a tiny fracture in her mask, the realization that she had no more cards to play. You used to say my dreams were foolish, I whispered, that no one would ever take me seriously. I stepped closer. They don't just take me seriously now, they pay me, they wear me, they believe me. Ethan looked away, Margaret didn't. And the vineyard? I said. You can keep it. You built it with control. I built this with fire. I smiled. She didn't. You walked out of my life with nothing, she said, her voice a little tighter. You left family behind. No, I said. I left your version of family behind. I found mine. She looked past me toward Jade, toward the team still celebrating in the dressing rooms, toward the runway. Then I guess we're done here, she said. But I wasn't done. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. You came tonight hoping I'd still need something from you, I said. A nod, approval, a crumb of recognition, but I don't. I leaned in just enough. And that's what stings the most, isn't it? Margaret's breath caught. Ethan put a hand on her arm. Let's go. She hesitated, then turned. They walked out together into the cold night, swallowed by the city. And just like that, the ghosts left the building. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, quiet. I turned around. Jade was still there. I walked over, and she smiled. How'd that feel? She asked. Like closing a book I don't need to reread. We stood together, watching the crew start cleanup behind the curtain. Someone dropped a hanger. Someone else played music low through a speaker. Now what? She asked. I looked around. At midnight, I said, we lock up. And tomorrow? I smiled. We start something new. But what neither of us knew, not then, was that in just a few weeks, the story wasn't done. It was only changing shape. Because after every triumph comes the question that matters most. What legacy are you willing to leave behind? The fabric was soft, ivory linen, lightweight and slightly translucent with a texture that whispered under my fingertips. I'd chosen it carefully, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like memory, worn, weathered, forgiving. Outside, the Los Angeles morning sun filtered through the studio windows in long gold streaks. The scent of steamed coffee and hot glue mingled in the air, grounding me in that familiar rhythm: design, build, repair, dream. But today was different. Today wasn't about me. Across the room, Jade sat on a folding stool, cross-legged, laptop balanced on her knee. Her hair was tied back in a pink scarf, the same one she wore the first day we met behind that thrift store counter. She caught my eye and nodded toward the door. They're here. The room shifted. A beat. A pause in the sewing machines. A shared inhale. I wiped my hands on my apron, heart fluttering in my chest, then walked over and pushed the door open. 4 teenagers stepped inside. Tessa was one of them, now 15, taller, more confident, still carrying her sketchbook like a lifeline. Beside her was Malik, who once designed a collection from old curtains, and Mia, who wore earrings made from vintage buttons. The last one, Jonah, didn't speak much, but had a quiet precision with pattern making that reminded me of the first time I ever drew a sleeve from memory. They were our first full scholarship cohort, the designers we'd chosen for Carter Lane's mentorship program. Young, overlooked, hungry, just like I was. Welcome back, I said, smiling. Ready for fittings? They nodded in unison, nervous smiles, excitement in their steps. I led them into the workspace where the new rack stood waiting, their sketches, our guidance, and a week of chaos woven into thread. Tessa reached out and ran her hand over the linen blouse she'd designed. You actually made it, she whispered. I crouched beside her. No, I said. You made it. We just helped you believe it was possible. The launch event was scheduled for that night. Small, local, press optional. The proceeds? Every last cent would go to these 4. Their education, their studios, their first real leap. And for the first time, the spotlight would shift. Jade and I spent the afternoon preparing the space, string lights looped across the beams, handwritten name tags taped to folding chairs, a Polaroid wall with their process pinned in snapshots. Larson arrived late, as usual, carrying a bouquet of hydrangeas wrapped in old sewing patterns. For the kids, he grumbled, setting them on the table, and maybe for you. He looked around the studio, bigger now, louder, filled with voices that hadn't yet been told to shrink. You built something here, he said quietly, not just a brand, a bridge. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him. He tensed as expected, then patted my back with the grace of a grumpy uncle. At 6 o'clock sharp, the guests arrived. Donors, students, a few local reporters. The lights dimmed. And then, just like that, the show began. But this time, I didn't stand behind the curtain. I stood off to the side, behind the front row, watching as Tessa stepped onto the runway in her blouse and wide-legged trousers, her shoulders squared like armor. The room clapped, not just politely, loudly, with feeling. Each design that followed told a different story. Malik's structured jacket with hidden pockets, Mia's layered skirt inspired by migration, Jonah's reversible coat lined with tiny embroidered constellations. When it ended, the applause didn't fade right away. And in that moment, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt continuity. Afterward, I gathered them outside the studio, beneath the neon sign that read, "She stitched her own salvation." The sun was gone. The night was cool. Streetlights flickered like quiet applause. "You did this," I told them. "Every stitch, every mistake, every idea. This is yours." Mia wiped her eyes. "I didn't think someone like me could ever, belong here." I touched her shoulder gently. "That's the lie, that there's a here only made for some of us." I turned toward the others. "This," I said, "is legacy, not power, not bloodlines, not inheritance. Legacy is what you build for someone else, what you hand off when your hands are tired, and now I'm handing it to you." Behind them, Jade wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. Jonah stepped forward. "What about your legacy?" I looked at him, then back at the open studio, at the glow of machines still humming, at the sketches pinned on the walls. "I already wrote mine," I said softly. "You're standing in it." Later that night, when everyone had gone, I returned to the old desk at the back of the studio. It was scratched, chipped, still stained with ink and spilled dye. In the drawer, beneath layers of swatches and receipts, I kept one folded piece of paper, the forged will. I held it in my hands one last time. Then I walked to the fire escape, held it over the metal rail, and let it go. It fluttered like a broken feather, then disappeared into the night. Not out of bitterness, but because it no longer had power. Margaret and Ethan could keep the vineyard. I'd built something that couldn't be divided, something that would outlive even my name. Before I turned in for the night, I took a marker and wrote across the whiteboard, "Dream loud enough that someone else hears you." Then I flipped the lights off, one by one. The hum faded. The silence returned. And for the first time in my life, I welcomed it. Lesson: legacy isn't about proving them wrong. It's about giving others the freedom to believe they can be right about themselves. Success isn't just the revenge, it's the foundation you build for someone else to stand on. If Ava's story inspired you, hit like and subscribe for more powerful journeys of resilience and rebirth. Comment below, what dream are you ready to reclaim? And share this with someone who needs to hear, you were never meant to be erased.